Okay, I'll make sure the stream comes up. Looks like it's okay. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Good. Welcome back. Welcome also to all the viewers who are online for our satsang today. We have a lot of great questions as always, and more than we can answer, so I'll apologize in advance if I don't get to answer your question. And as always, we'll alternate between online questions and questions from our local students in New Jersey. Okay, looks like we are in good shape, so let's begin. First question comes from Savitri, who lives in Bangalore. Is there a difference in the way objective, this is an interesting question, is there a difference in the way in which objective knowledge is stored in the brain, in the mind, a difference between that and how self-knowledge is stored in the mind? Is there a difference between how any other kind of knowledge is stored in the mind and a difference between how self-knowledge is stored in the mind? And you can see where she's going with this question, because then if it's stored in the mind and you have a coma or dementia or something else, or you forget. Have you ever forgotten? I forget things all the time. Oh, I forget I'm Satchidananda Atma. Okay. And the problem is that with this concept of stored in your mind, you've all been attending a lot of Vedanta classes, and you have a lot of Vedantic information stored in your mind, along with everything else. That's all information. Self-knowledge is not information. There it is. So what's stored in your mind is information about what is taught by the ancient rishis, what is taught in the Upanishads, what is taught in the Bhagavad Gita, what is taught by Sri Shankara, what Swami Tadatmananda is teaching. All of that, I won't say all of it, some of it, is stored in your mind, and that's a very good thing. But none of that is self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is the direct, immediate discovery of your true nature, which is not something you have to remember. It's you. Further, the most significant, and there is one way in which self-knowledge is very different than all other kinds of knowledge. The crucial difference is this. Self-knowledge destroys a particular kind of ignorance, which is the root cause for suffering. There's no other, your ignorance of the Chinese language that's a fact. I'm presuming, actually online we don't know, and there may be some people who speak, I don't know, one of the Mandarin or one of the languages. Your ignorance of Chinese, does it make you suffer? No. Okay. So your failure to have knowledge of Chinese has no negative consequence in your life, unless you were a translator hired to... I'm being silly. So, on the other hand, ignorance of your true nature has tremendous consequences on your life, being the source of suffering. So the real point of self-knowledge is not like any other kind of knowledge, you acquire it and store it away in a filing cabinet in your head, but rather The value of that self-knowledge is to remove the ignorance that causes suffering. So, next question. A question from Prashanto, who lives in Bangladesh. Experientially, it is proved that the presence of God is equally within us. So, what is the point of praying or being devout to an external God? So, if you know God is here, what is the point of praying to God on an altar? What is the point of praying to God, God in the heavens, or Lord Shiva, Lord Vishnu, Lord Krishna, a God who is separate from you? If you know God is here, that means you're enlightened, right? If properly understood, if you know God is here, you're enlightened. If you know. If you believe God is here, that's a different matter entirely. But if you know God is here, you're enlightened. And therefore, prayer becomes very different for an enlightened person. But the practice of bhakti is for enlightened people or unenlightened people. All spiritual practice is for those who are not yet enlightened. They're on the path. So the teachings of bhakti don't address those who have already discovered that God is present within me as my true nature, but rather the teachings of bhakti address those who are on the path to that discovery. And for such people, then praying to Ishvara, as Lord Shiva, as Lord Vishnu, as Krishna, or praying to a deity on an altar is all helpful on that path to enlightenment. After enlightenment, it may or may not be, it won't be necessary. By the way, does it mean that an enlightened person who has been praying at a particular, I'll just make up a story here. Suppose a very sincere spiritual seeker has been going to a particular temple every day for years. In India, that's very, very common. And then gets enlightened. Having gone to that temple every day for years and years and years, do you think this newly enlightened person is suddenly going to become allergic to going to that temple? No, there's no more, you can say there's no more need or necessity to go to that temple. But obviously they'll continue because it's been such an important part of their life for such a long time. Next question. Kartik in India. Shouldn't there be a more rigorous process to ensure that only ethical and qualified individuals rise to positions of political leadership? I wonder what he's referring to. Maybe not Indian politics. Maybe. Especially considering the suffering caused by corruption, manipulation, and war. What role can spirituality play in politics to guide leaders towards responsible governance and prevent conflict? Certainly, we recognize that in every country of the world, many political leaders are not ideal. That's a fact of life. Where is the solution? Should all the and I'm just going to play with this a little bit. Should we send all of the political leaders to some ashram, make them meditate, study, pray, and all of that? It's silly. Of course, it's silly. What is he says, what role can spirituality play? We shouldn't. It would be naive to expect our political leaders to suddenly be of a very high spiritual standing. Be nice if they had some ethical, some moral compass, but anyway, The fact is that those leaders are in power because of us. India is a democracy. This country is a democracy. So who put those leaders there? We did. The leaders we have reflect the nature of the countries that have elected them. And that's just a statement of fact. So, if the leaders are not very ethical, it's because they've been elected by people who don't have a very high value for ethical behavior, dharma. On the other hand, when people, the electorate, becomes more dharmic, that'll affect them when they go to vote. So the solution to the problem is for society in general to become more dharmic. And that's a role every one of us contribute to. As we become more dharmic and as our thinking kind of rubs off on some other people around us, then we contribute in some small way to a better future. Okay, another question here. This is from Sajit in Dubai. Brahman is a foundation of everything and is pure consciousness. Okay. How is consciousness present in non-living things like a rock? So everything is a manifestation of Brahman, and Upanishad says Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahman. What is that Brahma? Satyam, absolute reality, and Jnanam, consciousness. So think about it as a fabric of reality, Satyam, but a fabric of reality that is conscious. It's a little abstract, of conscious fabric of reality. So you and I, as individual beings, are products of that conscious fabric of reality. So is a rock. You and I can talk and think. That rock can't do anything. What is the difference? Obviously, difference is we have minds, we have very complex brains. The rock doesn't have any of that. So what we say is consciousness is present in the rock. Very interesting observation. Consciousness is as present in a rock as it is in you. It's a fact. What is the difference? You have a very complex brain and mind that can make that consciousness manifest. The rock has the same consciousness, but lacking brain and mind cannot make the consciousness manifest. So if you think of Brahman as having these two aspects, existence and consciousness. The rock very nicely makes existence manifest. You stub your toe on that rock and you'll know it very well. But the consciousness is not manifest. Whereas in you and me, both are manifest. Okay, let's take one more question here. This is from Jay, who lives in New York. What do you think about Dvaita and Vishishtadvaita? These are other schools of Vedanta. Dvaita, dualistic Vedanta, and Vishishtadvaita is qualified non-dualism. A little complicated. Why do you personally feel that Advaita Vedanta position is more correct and more logical? That's a really big topic, and I don't think we can do justice to it in Satsang. Let me just share my favorite story and then steer you to a video for further information. My favorite story about this, so a Dvaitan is one who says, you are you, God is God. Vishishtadvaitan is one who would say that we are all parts of God, all rays of that divine light. And the Advaitin says that you and God, the truth of you, your essential nature as Satchidananda Atma, is identical to that which is commonly called God, and Brahman, Ishvara, depending on what language you want to use. So here's a metaphor that I find so helpful. The three positions are God and me. Second position is I am a part of God. And third position is there's only one. And the story that I love that describes this is these three teachers go to the beach. One is Advaitin, the other is Vishishtadvaita, and the other is Advaitin. And they look at the ocean, and the Advaitin says, what a wonderful metaphor. Look how every wave is born of the ocean, every wave is sustained by the ocean, and every wave returns to the ocean, just as every jiva, every person, is a manifestation of Ishvara, born of Ishvara, sustained by Ishvara, returns to Ishvara. Definitely a dualistic perspective. By the way, Western religions are all dualistic in the same way as Advaita Vedanta, dualism. The second teacher says, no, you're wrong. What do you mean wrong? I mean, you look, look! You're wrong. Don't you see that every wave is a part of the ocean? And in fact, what you call ocean is the sum total of all these waves. Who's right? They're both right. Come on. Not that one is right and one is wrong. They're two different perspectives. So then comes they both ask, well, what do you think? They both ask us Advaita. He says, which of us is right? Are all these waves born of the ocean, sustained by the ocean, returned to the ocean, or are all these waves part of the ocean? And the Advaitin says, what waves? What ocean? He said, I only see water. So it's a cute story. It makes the point very simply. It's actually a very complex question. And to understand it in more detail, I think a year or two ago I published a video on Dvaita, Vishishtadvaita, and Advaita. I think why so much divisiveness. And I think it's an important video, and it will be a helpful video if you want to understand this a little bit more clearly. That would be a good way to proceed. Okay, do we have some questions here? Okay, we'll start back here. Get you here. No, we don't get you. That's okay. Go ahead, please.
Yes.
Yeah, we hear you. Oh, no, I have to push a button. Okay?
Hello?
Go ahead.
Yes. We had discussed last week, as well as this week, nididhyasana, and in more formal context. And you had just touched briefly on the fact that that's not the only form. So I just wanted to ask if there was more informal types that are discussed in the Shruti, some that might be more spontaneous, that type of contemplation that happens naturally through the stream of life.
Okay, good. So generally when we talk about nididhyasana, we talk about formal seated contemplation. But there's no rule that says you can only do nididhyasana when you're seated and meditating. Why not right now? Absolutely. There it is. And what I mean to convey is all you have to do is take a moment to appreciate who you truly are and what all this truly is. that appreciation can take place at any moment of your choosing when you turn your attention away from the world around you. You turn your attention towards the truth of who you are, consciousness, and you appreciate in that moment your nature as Satchidananda. You can do that right now. Why do you don't need a special occasion. However, that's not necessarily easy for many people to do. So it's often helpful to do formal seated contemplation, nididhyasana, first. And then you can cultivate the ability to do it at any time whatsoever. So nididhyasana, as we said before, is a matter of shifting your identification away from the body-mind, shifting it towards your true self. And you do that whenever you appreciate, whenever you detach your attention from your body and mind and redirect your attention to your true self. That's only part of it. So part of it is where you put your attention. Generally, our attention is extrovert. So nididhyasana requires an introverted attention, but that's only part of it. So with your attention introverted, the second part then is to appreciate who I am. I am unchanging consciousness. First is to turn your attention within, and then second, to make that appreciation. And that you can do anytime. Does that answer your question? Good, good. There's a question here. You'll need the microphone. You'll need the microphone. And it's for the people who are watching online can hear your question.
My question is, you said there is nothing like inside and outside. Then why I have to see inside?
If you're enlightened, you don't even have to do those.
No, but I mean,
this
even to have this nididhyasana, why? Because there is no such thing as inside. So why I have to be introvert and see inside?
Good. That's a good question. So, just as bhakti is a spiritual practice, which is meant for people who are not yet enlightened, in the same way nididhyasana is a spiritual practice for people who still think in terms of inside and outside. So if you think in terms of inside and outside, then nididhyasana is a valuable practice. But if your spiritual practice has gone beyond that, then there's no need to perform nididhyasana. So this is a very common problem. You cannot, and anyway, so it's a practice, and spiritual practices are meant for those who are not yet enlightened. Does that address the question? Okay. Other questions here? In back here, because the microphone is right here. No, you.
No, I don't.
Okay. All right. There's a question over here. Sorry. Cause some confusion. Please.
Swamiji, first of all, let me express our gratitude for this extraordinary opportunity to see you and for this satsang. My question is, in Patanjali Yoga Sutra, in the second sutra, it says yogas chitta vritti nirodha. That means we have to control the fluctuations of the mind. But it's the mind that has to control it.
So
how does it work? I mean, is there something above mind that orchestrates this, or are there two independent compartments within the mind?
I think you're overthinking this. Who is the one who has a mind? Whoever says, I have a mind, that is the one who then undertakes meditation practice for the sake of controlling the mind. So it's very simple and intuitive. Who am I? If I'm not yet enlightened, then I am this individual person with a body and mind, and suffering. I suffer, and therefore I want to become free from suffering. Therefore, I'm going to learn how to meditate. I'm going to learn how to control my mind as part of spiritual practice. So there are places where a lot of this kind of discernment, this is this and that is that, a lot of discernment is helpful. But I think in this case, it's just we take it very in a more simple way. The Vedanta spiritual practice, all spiritual practice is to be performed by whom? And I find a very helpful answer to that is this: whoever says, I suffer. Whoever says, I suffer, that is the person who will benefit from spiritual practice. And whoever says, I suffer, however you understand yourself, that's the one who needs it. Does that address your question?
Not really.
Okay.
So the fluctuations happen within the mind,
Yes.
but it's the mind that has to control it. So
The mind is not...
This looks like this looks like a thing that cannot happen at all.
Okay. So the mind is a little complicated though, isn't it? Doesn't the mind have various parts?
Yeah,
The mind has things like memory. We make a distinction between manas and buddhi. We also acknowledge other aspects of mind like ego, ahankara. So mind is not one thing. Mind is a collection of all of these faculties. There are many, many mental faculties. One of those faculties is agency. Agency means the ability to do. And that ability to do is called, in Sanskrit, we call kartritva. So kartritva, agency, is one of a gazillion, that's a precise number, a gazillion faculties of the mind, one of which is agency. So the faculty of the mind, called agency, is used then to supervise, as it were, other activities of the mind. And since these faculties are all different, then there's no question that one can affect another. And just a very simple example. You can use your faculty of agency right now to think of an elephant. There you have it. You've used your faculty of agency to create a memory to call to mind a memory of an elephant. So the elephant is in your mind, the faculty of agency is in your mind, and a gazillion other things are in your mind. So it's this faculty of agency. Who wields that faculty of agency is the one who says I, ahankara, ego. So that I faculty, that sense of I-ness, combined with the faculty of agency, is the one that will engage in meditation practice or anything else. Okay? Okay, I'm a little bit more complete. Okay, shall we take some more questions online here? Next question comes from Rao. Rao doesn't say where Rao lives. With regard to moksha, we say that somebody who, just paraphrase some of this to give context. He's talking about someone who's gained moksha, and moksha being a condition of being desireless. So with that in mind, that gaining moksha means a state of being desireless. Rao asks, but what about dharmic obligations and the pursuit of necessary actions? If you're desireless, will you become allergic to dharmic obligations? Why should you? Usually people are allergic to dharmic obligations because they have a desire. I want to get out of this. I want to avoid this dharmic obligation. The enlightened person has no desire to avoid dharmic obligations. What about the desire to perform our duties well and use all faculties in the best possible manner? That's a common desire. When people do something, they want to do it well. Why? Think about it. Generally, because, and I'm sorry to be a little sarcastic, you want to do it well because you want to be better than everyone else. And sorry to be sarcastic, and it's not completely true, but there's a little shred of truth there for everyone. It's a matter of pride. I want to do well. I'm back to sarcasm. You're showing off. So the enlightened person can still do things well, but without wanting to show off, without having the desire to show themselves as being better than anyone else. So an enlightened person behaves in the same way as an unenlightened person, but freed from all of these distortions that are caused by desire. Desire has a way of perverting our behavior. And that's a strong word, but I think it's deserved here. It distorts our behavior. Anyway, that's something else. Next question. Radhika, who lives in, here we go again, Tiruvananthapuram. I'm getting better at this. Yeah, South Indian names, okay. You said in life that we have to struggle for moksha in this life itself. There's no guarantee that we will get a human life in our next birth. Correct. If a person strives for moksha but fails to attain it, shouldn't that sincere effort lead her to an opportunity to continue the same and achieve enlightenment in her next life, at least? It looks unfair to have to start all over again in a human form. You know that chutes and ladder thing? So, fortunately for Radhika, and not just for Radhika, for everyone, Sri Krishna actually addresses this very issue at the end of chapter 6. And generally, by the way, in the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says almost nothing about how the doctrine of karma works. But he does address this particular issue. And what he says is if you have been a sincere spiritual aspirant in this life and die before you gain moksha, he says you will indeed pick up the thread in your next life and immediately succeeding life. But this is not the result of karma. And here we have to learn a little bit about the doctrine of karma. So the good karmas that person has done in this life, so pursuing spiritual growth means you have lived a life of good karma. And then you come to the end of your life having accumulated a lot of good karma, which is going to bless you in the future. But the good karma that you've accumulated in this life becomes part of your sanchita karma. Your sanchita karma includes also a lot of papa karma due to mistakes that you've done in prior lives. So just because you've accumulated a lot of good karma in this life doesn't mean you don't have bad karma. You still do. And that bad karma could affect you in the next life. So what Sri Krishna teaches, that you will pick up the thread in your next life, this is not determined by the law of karma. You cannot use the law of karma to establish it. It doesn't work. It's due to a different principle. It's due to a principle called samskara, impression. It is said that we already know that memories do not survive from one life to the next. I know there are lots of people who say, but what about this, what about that? Fine, it's all anecdotal. It doesn't prove anything. The fact that someone says, I remember this, that, and the other thing, fine, they claim to remember it. It's not a proof. So we don't know. But definitely, you and I, we don't remember anything. Nothing. Nothing at all. Okay, so just based on your experience and mine, we know that memories do not survive from one life to the next. That's your experience and mine. Samskara, we translate as impression. And an impression is different from a samskara. An impression is how to put this into English terminology here. It is a strong inclination towards a particular kind of activity or a particular kind of thing, a very deeply embedded inclination. With that definition in mind, we can say that there is evidence that there's evidence that even though memories don't survive, some of these deep samskaras may survive. And it's often been suggested that as evidence, by the way, this is not a concrete proof, but as evidence, people will point to child prodigies. So if somebody has an unusual skill at a very, very young age, some people say that perhaps that person in the immediately prior life had developed a samskara, which then became manifest in this life. That's not a proof. It is evidence. We'll call it. So this is the basis for what Sri Krishna says. At the end of chapter 6, he calls a person a yoga brashta, someone who has done a lot of yoga, but then brashta, fallen away from that spiritual practice, fallen away in a sense of having died. And then it's, according to Sri Krishna, because of the intensity of that person's spiritual practice, creates a samskara which can survive death and become manifest in the next life. So he says the person will pick up the thread in the immediately succeeding life. So Radhika has nothing to worry about. Besides the fact, maybe Radhika will get enlightened in this life. Why wait? Next question from, this question is from Sarah. Sarah, who lives in India, Italy. Okay, if she lived in India, you'd have to call her Sara. But she lives in Italy, so it's Sarah. Sarah. Sorry. She is apparently studying Tattva Bodha, this very short text of Shankara, in which he enumerates certain prerequisites for a student of Vedanta. Those prerequisites, she correctly says, include shama, mental calmness, dhamma, control of senses, and I like the fact that she's translated everything quite nicely. Uparati, renunciation, titiksha, patience, shraddha, faith, and samadhi, concentration. Sarah has nicely translated. And she says, These qualities are essential for a student to effectively engage with the teachings of Vedanta and progress on the path towards self-realization and liberation. All absolutely correct. Now, she has some questions. Are these qualities mandatory from the very beginning? These qualities are, I like to use the English word prerequisite. It's something we're all familiar with from our college days, where you had to fulfill certain prerequisites before you could attend a certain course. And if you remember your school days, they generally didn't make exceptions. So if you didn't have the prerequisites, you couldn't register for the course. So is it true that if you don't have all these qualities, if you reflect on the qualities she's listed, it's a pretty tall order. Shama, mental calmness. You're calm now. Are you calm all the time? Probably not. And all of these, Dhamma, control of the senses, uparati, and these qualities are a big deal. So is it necessary to first acquire all these qualities? I'm paraphrasing your question. Is it necessary to fully acquire all these qualities first before you start studying Vedanta? No, of course. And the reason is that this is not a linear process. Academic study is linear. You have your what did we have back then? Calculus 401, differential equations 402, transform mathematics 403. So there is a sequence. Or how about, let's make it simple. Geometry 101, trigonometry 102. Okay, you get the idea. So academic study is linear. This is not academic study. And it's extremely non-linear. So it means that while you are engaged in the study of Vedanta, you are simultaneously acquiring the required values. Okay. Next question, does mental illness disqualify someone from following Vedanta? In general, no, but in some, if somebody is actually disabled, there's some mental illnesses which are really, really disabling. Like severe schizophrenia, for example. It just destroys lives. So if the person can function fairly normally, then in spite of the mental illness, that person can certainly pursue Vedanta. Although I should add that Vedanta won't treat the mental illness. It's a spiritual study, spiritual thing. It's a spiritual practice that addresses spiritual problems. If you have a psychological problem, you need a psychological solution. Simply put, psychological solution for psychological problem, spiritual solution for spiritual problem. Finally, how can someone like me, who may not have fully developed these qualities, engage in Vedanta? I think that we answered that in the first question. It's non-linear. So it's a long process. So you go on cultivating these values. We'll leave it there. Next question from Neil. Neil, who lives in Atlanta. This is a very interesting observation. He says, this is with reference to our recent study of the Uddhava Gita. The Uddhava Gita, because it's part of the Bhagavata Purana, gives special importance to bhakti. So bhakti gets gets elevated, so to speak, to the same level as jnana. And that's one of the unique traits of the features of the Bhagavata Purana. So you can take the path of jnana and the path of bhakti. Neil suggests here, though, isn't it true that the path of bhakti can be considered more dangerous than the path of jnana? From what I've seen, it seems like those with a bhakti mindset are more susceptible to falling prey to distractions such as numerology, astrology, TV advertisements, excessive ritualism that can thwart a seeker from realizing his goal. Sadly, I know too many people of a bhakti mindset who do not employ viveka, discernment, and consume whatever spiritual garbage that is thrown at them. Little judgmental, maybe. Just an observation. Therefore, isn't the path of jnana a safer path to practice? One thing I really agree with Neil on is that anyone who's on a spiritual path is subject to distractions. So if you are a bhakta on a spiritual path, and I'm trying to think, what would be the distraction? Ritual would be an example. So someone who becomes deeply attached, and there are many people I know, deeply attached to their morning puja. For 2 hours every morning, they will do this puja. Even though other things which may be more important aren't being attended to, this puja is so important. So that would be an example, perhaps, of a distraction. Excessive focus on ritual, I would agree, would be a distraction to the spiritual path, and not. Bhakti, of course, is important, but an excessive focus on ritual might be a distraction, for some people at least. But now, is it fair to say that only people on the path of bhakti are subject to such distractions, and people on the path of jnana are not subject to distractions? I think that's a huge wrong conclusion. And here's why. Many, I don't know how many more manys I should put there. Many people who are on this path of knowledge are subject to the biggest distraction possible on this so-called path of knowledge, and that is they are engaged with the teachings of Vedanta for the sake of acquiring information. That is one of the most common distractions. They want to know, what does this Upanishad teach? What does that Upanishad? What is Shankara's? And why do Shankara and Ramanuja differ on these points? And then what about Madhvacharya? And all these people go on, and look at the subtle differences in how they approach different things. Tell me, what has that got to do with being on a path to moksha? But that's such a common distraction for those who are on the path of jnana, spiritual wisdom. To me, it seems whatever path you're on, all people are equally subject to distractions. And so I certainly would not say that bhakti is in any sense inferior. And I think Neil might have a very strong preference for jnana, which is fine, but it's not fair to look at others who are on different paths and to imply that maybe they are on a lower path. There's no higher and lower path. I don't think we should. That's not a helpful way of looking at things. Next question from Arun, who lives in Bangalore. You've stated many times that death brings an end to all experiences. In that case, what about those who experience things in different lokas as mentioned in the Puranas. When I said death is the end of experience, it means that before you're born again, there's no experience. So maybe I didn't make that clear when I made that statement. After you die and before you get reborn, there's no experience. Because in order to experience, you need a mind and a manifest condition. In the absence of a mind and a manifest condition, there's no possibility of experience. So until you acquire another body and mind, there's no experience. But if there is such a thing as rebirth, you acquire another body and mind and have experiences again. And those experiences could be in some other loka. They could be in an earthly loka. They could be in any form. Next, Archana from Canada. She said, you've said many times that, I like this question. You've said multiple times that our experience can fool us. Big time. How can we reconcile? And just to give some examples, the experience that this is me is an experience that fools us. Similarly, if someone has an experience in meditation of discovering Atma as a shining blue pearl, there's one group that teaches this. When you get enlightened, you will see a shining blue pearl suspended in the darkness. That's an experience. And I have no doubt that followers of that group, they have that experience. Fine. Experiences can fool us. Anything you experience, by definition, is not you. Right? Atma. So whatever you experience, by definition, is anatma. That's Vedanta 101. So experiences fool us. And so now, how can we reconcile the experience or vision of the great Sri Ramakrishna when he was a pujari, a priest? He had a vision of Kali, an experience of Kali, goddess. And here, this is significant. Archana says, I have teenage children who argue with me that Sri Ramakrishna must have been hallucinating. Imagine, teenage children will argue with that, like that. And we better be ready for that. So how can you discern Sri Ramakrishna's vision of Kali from a hallucination? First thing, let's admit, we have no way of investigating this. The only way we could find out is if we could chat with Sri Ramakrishna, and he's been gone for 200 years. So not happening. So then, how then can we approach this? There's in philosophy in general, there's a very simple principle that's been used, and that is to judge. In fact, our Christian friends use this, and it's helpful. To judge something by its fruits, by its merits. If someone has schizophrenia, which is often accompanied by hallucinations, in particular audio, they hear things very commonly. So if someone suffering from schizophrenia has hallucinations, what are the fruits of, what do you mean, fruits? Those are symptoms of a terrible illness. Compare that to the case of Sri Ramakrishna, whose vision of Kali transformed him in such a way that every shred of his being became devoted to spiritual life. This is a transformative experience in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. Prior to that, he was an uneducated pujari. After that experience, he was still an uneducated pujari, but he was an uneducated pujari who had this incredible inspiration and insights that followed as a result. And because of his tremendous insights and inspiration, he drew, you know the story, he drew around him a group of young Bengalis, mostly college students, including Naren, Swami Vivekananda, and what ensued was something quite remarkable and important. So if we were to judge by the fruits, so there's no way we can prove whether or not Sri Ramakrishna was hallucinating or not. But we do know what was the outcome. And the outcome was something remarkably good. So this is how we would approach such a situation. Are there other questions here before we continue? No? Then let's take a few more here. Amit asks, we can experience know Saguna Brahman in meditation or through self-inquiry, just like Nirguna Brahman. Also separating them, does it not cause duality in our minds? How can we perceive them as one? Somehow Saguna Brahman seems like a separate entity. Kindly clear the confusion. I'm sorry, I'm a little confused about the question, so I'm not sure how to... First of all, Saguna Brahman, Nirguna Brahman are fancy technical words. Saguna Brahman is Ishvara, commonly God. And then Nirguna Brahman is an absolute reality. So if we say Saguna Brahman is God, then, or let's use the word Ishvara. If we say Saguna Brahman is Ishvara, then we have to say Nirguna Brahman is that because of which Ishvara exists. There you go. Saguna Brahman is Ishvara, and Nirguna Brahman is that because of which Ishvara exists. How can we perceive them as one? There it is. Thank you. How can we perceive them as one? Ishvara is like the pot. The reality because of which the pot exists is clay, which represents Brahman. I see one. Do you see two things in my hand? Or one? So they're understood to be one through these Vedantic teachings, to understand the relationship between name and form. So Ishvara, creator, sustainer, destroyer, karma phala data, the one who gives you blessings. But the reality because of which Ishvara exists is what we call Brahman. Okay, and which is a matter of understanding. Something about next question. Where did it go? Can we experience? Here, this is a little tricky. Can you experience Ishvara? In a sense, everything you experience is Ishvara. Can you experience Nirguna Brahman? And this is a little complicated question from the standpoint of Advaita Vedanta, and here's the problem. Ultimately, Vedanta teaches that Brahman is not just a truth because of which Ishvara exists. Ishvara is the truth because of which everything exists. I'm sorry, I'm mixing my words. Brahman is the reality because of which Ishvara exists. Brahman is a reality because of which everything exists. Brahman is a reality because of which you exist. That's what Tattvamasi means. You, the truth of you, Atma, is Tat Brahman. Atma is Brahman, is the meaning of of the Mahavakya Tattvamasi. So, can you know Brahman separate from yourself? Brahman is you, so Brahman can never be known as something separate from yourself. Just a little technical thing from the teachings of Advaita Vedanta. We'll take just one or two more questions and wrap it up. This question comes from Gordon, who lives in Glasgow. Nice. The availability of jnana depends on preparedness, like the question we saw from Sarah in Italy. Preparedness involves, among other qualities, losing interest in other pursuits, etc. Actually, Sarah gave us a nice list of what is involved with preparedness. And Gordon actually makes a very similar observation, as Sarah did. These qualities seem to me to be beyond what's possible for ordinary people. So unlike how most people, and I dare say students, including this one, live. So don't these qualities in themselves require enlightenment? And this really goes exactly back to Sarah's question. And here's one way to understand. You require those qualities in relative measure for the sake of your spiritual progress. The more the qualities grow, the more your progress grows. So it's again, this is nonlinear. So you've got progress. Sorry, I'm back. Can you tell that I'm a former engineer when I start describing things with graphs? Engineers love graphical representation. So here I'm giving you a graphical. Actually, if I'm going to give you, I have to do it backwards here, backwards for me. So imagine this is your spiritual path, progress. In order to make this progress, if you have to make equal progress in these qualities. So as your qualities go up, your spiritual progress grows up. And where do you reach the limit? So at some point out here is enlightenment. Well, when you reach that point called enlightenment, then the qualities are complete. They go on rising, rising, rising. And the point is you need to be adequately prepared. And sometimes that word adequate is left out. So I gave the example before of prerequisites. So before you can advance, before you can take the next course in a series in college, do you have to have an A in that prior class? You could have a B, you could have a C. I don't know if people got D's, but anyway, you need not have an A in a prior class in order to qualify for your next course. So that's kind of the idea. You don't need to be perfectly qualified, you need to be adequately prepared. Okay, last question. Brajesh from Singapore, he says, despite many differences, religions such as Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, and Buddhism, they all agree on the laws of karma. How do you explain that? Well, I would be surprised if they didn't agree, at least in part, since karma is a universal principle. I would be more surprised if some accepted and some rejected. What I think is more significant is that each one of these groups has their own perspective on the doctrine of karma. In fact, even within Hinduism, there are so many versions and interpretations. Because, we'll just end with this observation. Tell me, if I tell you that the main scripture on meditation is Yoga Sutras, if I say that the most important scripture on karma yoga is the Bhagavad Gita, if I say the most important teachings of Advaita Vedanta are collected in the Upanishads, you would agree with all that. Now let me ask you, then in what text do we find the most clear compilation of the doctrine of karma? What is the text? What is the scripture? There is not a text or a scripture that defines the doctrine of karma. The doctrine of karma is not located in any particular scripture. It is scattered amongst thousands of scriptures. In particular, most of what we understand about the doctrine of karma is found in major scriptures, like especially the Mahabharata and the 18 Mahapuranas, which tell thousands of stories that illustrate the doctrine of karma and illustrate the doctrine of karma differently. This is how we understand the doctrine of karma. Based on that huge compilation of assortment, I should call it, of teachings on the doctrine of karma, we try our best to distill kind of a simple, straightforward explanation. That's what you've heard from me, is my attempt to simplify and make some order or sense out of all of that. But we should know that there is no one scripture, and secondly, we should know there is no one correct interpretation of the doctrine of karma. Okay, that's a good place to conclude. We'll have more questions next week. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinaha sarve santu niramayaha sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschad dukkha bhag bhavet asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritangamaya. Om shanti shanti shanti. Om.